Hello, everyone. Next up, I'd like to introduce Ty Miller from Immortal Cyber Teams, and he'll be talking about fighting a digital war with the Skeleton Crew. Please make him feel welcome.
Thank you. Welcome to AUSCERT. Thanks for attending the session. So, yep, the greatest introduction ever. Nice and short. So, yeah, my name is Ty Miller. I'm the Managing Director of Immortal Cyber Teams, which we're just launching at AUSCERT today. So go and check out the booth. So MD of Threat Intelligence. So we're threatintelligence.com. So we're a specialist cybersecurity services company. You know, your typical sort of penetration testing, digital forensics, managed services, GRC, that sort of stuff. You know, a lot of the guys that we have on our team, Black Hat trainers, Black Hat presenters. You know, they've been around for a good couple of decades, so very senior or very principal sort of guys, very smart. So we actually run the longest Black Hat training globally called the Shellcode Lab. So that's been going about 15 years. So we run that across Black Hat USA, Black Hat Europe, Black Hat Asia. We're on the Black Hat Asia review board to select the presentations to go through to Black Hat. You know, we train up the likes of the FBI, US Department of Defense, US military, international government agencies, all the big tech and security companies. So the likes of, you know, we've taught the likes of, you know, Microsoft, Google, Mandiant, CrowdStrike, Fortinet, Juniper, who else? Cisco, VMware, Oracle, and then, you know, obviously a bunch of others. Yeah, there's other training courses we run over there as well. There's things like automating security with open source, ultimately to try and help organizations or security teams to maximize their teams. That's been running for, I think it's maybe about 7 years, something along those lines. And yeah, so in short, very smart guys within the threat intelligence crew. And then, yeah, like I mentioned, we're really excited. We've been building out a new platform called Immortal Cyber Teams for the last, well, it's been going for a good 10 years, to be honest, but definitely over the last 2 years stepped it up. And so what I want to talk about is really how we're going to run our cybersecurity teams and actually make a difference with a skeleton crew, right? I think everyone in here probably has that feeling that we don't have enough people and capabilities and all of that sort of fun stuff. And ultimately, the cybersecurity industry has failed. If you look at any other industry on the planet, if they were performing as well as we were, they would be axed, right? They would not be around anymore, right? Because we are absolutely failing at protecting our organizations and our customers, right? So if we actually have a look at this, there's things like the threat actors, right? When you have a look at the stats, there are about 5,000 threat actor groups out there, right? And they're large and small, right? Going from the really well-known ones right down to sort of mini groups. So there's 5,000 groups out there trying to break into our organizations. Within those, there's also APT groups, so your state-sponsored attackers. There's about 257 of those, so quite well-funded, you know, quite sophisticated attacks. We've seen some of those recently. There's ransomware gangs, so they're the ones that, you know, make the news where our organizations are getting popped. We do a lot of digital forensic investigations, so this was all public, you know, and in the legal documents and things, but we were the lead digital forensic investigators on the Medibank breach. So I was the first person they called, and then I got my crew out of bed and started dealing with that, and we're still dealing with that a couple of years later in terms of the legal ramifications that have come off the back of that. Also did the what's called the post-incident investigation for the Latitude breach. Again, still working with their lawyers on that against things like, you know, class action lawsuits as well as government organizations coming after them and whatnot. And you look at them, and there's huge impacts coming off those from these ransomware gangs. So there's about 94 ransomware gangs. Over the last year, there's been about 40% increase in ransomware gangs that have been increased. If you have a look at the capabilities of some of these, what's available to these threat actor groups these days, you're looking at, like when you have a look at the exploits that are available, there's around, over the last probably about 5 years or so, there's been about 13,000 new exploit repositories on things like GitHub and those sort of things. So huge amounts of exploits. They're not all necessarily unique. When you have a look at the unique ones, you're looking at about 70,000 unique exploits, right, that are available to threat actors to be able to go and break into organizations. Okay, so clearly a lot of interest from threat actor groups. When you have a look at the threat actor revenue, so not the damage, the actual revenue that they earn, it's about 2.3 trillion Australian dollars that these threat actor groups earn, right, every year. So that's annual. Massive amount of money to be able to fund break-into organizations. Not that you actually need it when you've got 70,000 open source exploits. When you compare that to the likes of, the global drug trade, that's about 776 billion, right? So you think about if you've watched Narcos and all that sort of thing, and you see all of the money being buried in fields, cybercrime is actually 3 times the size, this from a profitability perspective, than things like the drug trade, right? So massive motivation again. When you break that down, there's things like 860 billion from online marketplaces. There's 500 billion from IP theft. And the one that we tend to see more is when the organizations are getting broken into, ransomware's being deployed, you're then getting extorted. So we do all of the threat actor sort of extortion negotiations and things as well. That's about 160 billion, like in revenue that they earn from that, right? So huge, huge numbers. When you flip that on its head and you look at not just the revenue that they're earning, but also the damage that they're inflicting. So like I mentioned, the Medibank one and the Latitude one are probably going to cost them maybe $100 to $200 million by the time it's all said and done. That's not taking into account the ludicrous fines that are being proposed. I think the Medibank one in the news was something like $21 trillion that, if you multiply out every record that got stolen, that would be imposed. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But huge amounts of damage from that. When you look at, so the damage globally is 16 trillion Australian dollars. Okay, that's, when you look at it per second, that's $31 million a second that cybercrime is impacting organizations. Okay, if you then think about 2,500 Ferraris, right? So picture how big that is, 2,500 Ferraris. During this time that I'm talking, we could blow up 2,500 Ferraris, and that's the same impact that cybercrime has had during this presentation, right? So it's quite significant, right? So you look at that from an organization perspective, and then you've got your boards and executives clearly freaking out, quite rightfully freaking out. And so we run things like incident response simulation exercises for boards and executives. We use all of our real life experience from different investigations that we've run, and we piece it together for them, basically to freak the hell out of them, right, at the end of the day. And it's realistic, though, because it's come from these real world scenarios. So by the end of these, at the start, they're all pretty relaxed. Oh, this is going to be a bit of fun. The last one that we ran, the CEO said to us, there are not many things that would be able to destroy my business entirely, but this is absolutely one of them. I can see through that scenario that's been mapped out against our organization that if this happened, we would be screwed, right? And that could completely fold our business, right? So as you can imagine, boards and executives have this as either the number one or number two top strategic initiative within organizations. But the problem is we keep failing at delivering it, right? We can't say to them that, yes, we've got enough people, yes, we've got enough tech or capabilities or skills within our organizations to be able to actually deliver on that promise of we'll try and protect you, right? Okay, so how do we end up in this position, right? It's a pretty bleak sort of outlook. I get that. However, this number on the board, 40%, this relates to the number of organizations that, they claim that cybersecurity employees are the hardest to find, right? So it's showing that, yes, we do want to hire more people, but we just literally can't hire the people that we need. Right, so 40% of organizations, which is a huge percentage. You got 350%, right? So this is the increase over the last decade of unfilled cybersecurity jobs, right? So they're vacant jobs that are just getting worse and worse and worse as time goes on. If you look at the next statistic, 4 million, right? This 4 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs globally at this point in time. Right, last year it was 3.5 million. Now it's up to 4 million. And these are only the ones that are advertised right now, right? And so some of those will get filled, but then throughout the year there's going to be more that get advertised. These are also the ones that companies are just saying, well, we need this role, right? And that may be because they don't have anyone, so they just hire, they're looking for a general security person to be able to manage stuff. The reality, though, is that for them to stay safe, they actually need a significant specialist team of security people to be able to actually manage their security properly, right? So you can't just go and get one guy who's got a year of experience or even 5 years of experience or 10 years to be able to run your entire cybersecurity operation, right? You need a whole team of specialists to be able to actually do that. So 30 million is more likely the number, that we actually need to be advertising for and filling roles for to be able to fill the roles that are not just advertised, but the ones that are actually needed to protect our organizations. Right, so that's a stupidly high number of unfilled cybersecurity roles, right? And that just paints the picture as to, where we're at, where we've got all of this these massive threats. They're fully funded, they've got all of these attack tools and they've got enough time, they're not on deadlines to break into organizations. Whereas you've got your cyber teams who can't even find the people to be able to defend ourselves, right? Okay, so that obviously has some pretty significant impacts on our organizations when we're running a skeleton crew to be able to defend against an army of cyber threats trying to break into our organizations. So the cybersecurity teams that we get are obviously smaller. So when you've got limited budgets within cybersecurity, so let's be honest, cybersecurity is an expense. It's not a profit making unless you're a cybersecurity company selling services or products. It's not a profit making exercise, it's an expense. From a business perspective, their objective is to be as profitable as possible, which means that cybersecurity investment is always going to be limited, right? And that's what we've got to work with, and that's just the reality of it, right? So what that means as a knock-on effect is cybersecurity teams are small, not just because the people don't exist, but also because the budgets don't exist to actually fill those teams, right? So if you suddenly came across a group sitting in the corner of cybersecurity rock stars and you went up and said, yep, I want to hire all 6 of you, for example, you wouldn't be able to do it because the expense would be way too high for these guys, right? Okay, so you've got small teams who are required to cover the entire ground of your organization. So because the people don't exist, you know, from those 4 million or 30 million unfilled cybersecurity roles, you ultimately have to look for or hire less skilled staff or more generalist staff, right? And I'm trying to say this in as least offensive way as possible, right? But most organizations out there have a lot of generalist security people, which they need, right? Because they don't have the budgets or they can't find the people to be able to fill those really in-depth technical roles that you actually need. So you end up hiring these relatively generalist cybersecurity teams. They look after your organization. They don't necessarily know all of they don't have the deep technical skills to actually analyze threats. They don't necessarily know how to actually, you know, how an attack happens. You know, how does an exploit work? How do they break in? You know, how does the back door work? How do they bypass antivirus detection or endpoint security protection? You know, how do they, you know, hide in memory and all this sort of stuff? You know, how does the command and control work and all of that sort of thing? They don't have the deep technical capabilities underneath that to be able to understand it in depth, to be able to really protect the organizations. Because they're a limited team, they've got limited time, right? There's only so much you can do with, you know, 1, 2, 3 people, or you might have a bigger team, but not necessarily be able to have the full coverage. And so again, when you've got a limited team, you've also got a limited coverage, which again leaves huge gaps within your organization against this, you know, cyber battle that's going on, where they're basically finding these gaps and breaking in. So what that then does is leads to cybersecurity burnout, right? So your teams, and we've seen this firsthand with incident response engagements, so the major breaches that we manage. When I get brought into, I typically get brought into the major breaches to sort of manage, not necessarily the technical side of things. I actually come in and manage the emotions of all of the people that are working, right? Everyone from the board of directors to the CEO to some of the lead techs. We've had multiple incident response engagements where we've had the CEO on the floor crying, right? Just curled up on the floor, just full panic attack crying. I've been nursing, like I'm not a counselor, right? But you know, nursing people through panic attacks whilst they're on their phone, like the cybersecurity guys who want to protect the business. They feel like they've failed, right? And they feel like they're about to get fired, right? Because they've failed, completely ignoring the fact that they have a limited team, they've got limited budgets and skills, and that was known when they were hired, right? But you know, they're passionate about it, and they start breaking down. And when you put that into, it happens every time, right? Every single time. And the reason why that happens is one, obviously, yes, they care and they're burnt out and whatever. But also when these breaches happen, no one sleeps for like at least a couple of days, right? In those first couple of days, fatigue kicks in really, really quickly. Once you get fatigued, your mental state is gone, right? So that's another thing that I manage during these engagements is right up front, I say to them, you know, the execs or the CEO, like, how are you going to manage your resources? Because these guys are going to break down really quickly. You know, give them 24 hours. They're not going to want to go to bed because they're freaking out about their jobs. And so, that sort of continues and they get burnt out. So this is what people, cybersecurity teams that we talk to, are worried about, right? Like they want to help, but they're looking at this, pardon my French, a shit show of a train wreck that's coming their way. They're the driver of the train, right? And they're just looking at it coming, right? And there's nothing really they can do about it at the moment, right? So there's huge impacts that come into it. We're a little bit of a problem in there as well, in that you go and hire someone, you train them up, you've had them for a number of years, and they're suddenly starting to get really good. Your cyber's starting to sort of chug along, and then companies like mine notice them and say, hey, you should come across to us. They're like, oh, that looks really exciting, let's go do that. They come across to us, and then suddenly you've lost your entire investment in your cybersecurity team or your head of your cybersecurity team, and you've suddenly just jumped back 10 steps. So at the end of the day, there's not enough skilled humans to win this battle, right? So if you're fighting a war, right, let's say it's Australia versus Europe, right, we are not going to win, right? We are going to lose absolutely horribly, right? So there just aren't enough of us to be able to take on Europe or America or whoever, right? So let's have a look at the structure of some of the key cybersecurity roles that you need to have within your organization to actually start at least having a chance of battling this war, right? Because if you don't have these teams in place or these people in place, you're basically lost. Every one that you don't have, you can think about a massive gap within your security. Okay, so cyber threat intelligence specialist. If you don't have a cyber threat intel specialist looking after and tracking all of the threat activities going on, then you've got a massive gap, right? Do you have people, who know how to go through the dark web? Do they know what Telegram channels to be looking at? Where to get the data, from data leaks? Have they got that all set up and automated? If you've ever tried to pull in all of this data, guess what? It's not production-ready data. It is absolute junk, right? So pulling that in and making it useful is a huge amount of work to get that going, right? All of the billions of leaked passwords that are out there, whether they come from third-party security breaches that get leaked, or these days, a lot of the security breaches we manage are around things like your Stealer malware infections. Credentials get stolen. One of your employees' kids goes and downloads the cracked version of Grand Theft Auto, runs it on the home machine. Someone from your organization goes home, logs into their Office 365. See you later. They then get into your organization, right? And keep going from there. So you've got to have your threat intelligence under control so you're staying ahead of the threats. Right, so when you look at the cyber kill chain, which has a bunch of complex sort of setups, I like to think of it in 3 steps. There's your threats, there's your attacks, and there's your security breaches. Right, basically, before you get breached, you're getting attacked, and then you get breached. Right, they're basically the 3. So your cyber threat intel is really that first one. I want to see what threats are coming and try and dissolve those threats before they actually even start attacking us. To get to that second stage. So then you've got things like, do you have any penetration testers on your team? Typically, you'll have vulnerability management people or some vulnerability scanners. I can tell you from over 20 years of experience of doing pen testing and all that sort of stuff, coming out of the vuln scanners, and sorry if there's any, I do like some of the vuln scanners, but 99% of them, 99.9% of the vulnerabilities coming out of them are not exploitable, right? And that's either because the exploits don't exist or your system is in a configuration where it's not exploitable, right? So you scan like a Linux machine, for example, it will come up with Apache vulnerabilities or Nginx vulnerabilities and all of the plugins and things like that, the exploits for those need them in a very specific configuration to actually be exploitable, right? You don't have to be running around, even if an exploit exists, trying to fix it. But having said that, vulnerability management is dead, right? You have to look at exploitability management. So when you go to, if you present to boards, for example, or to your managers, and you say, oh yeah, this month we've gone from, 10.5 million vulnerabilities to 10.4 million vulnerabilities. We're looking really good this month, right? That looks horrendous, right? Whereas if you can say, yeah, we've got 10.5 million vulnerabilities, there were 5 that were actually exploitable. We fixed those up, right? And that's now closed off this month. Right, the next month there might be some new exploits and new vulnerabilities that come out. All right, 3 of them were exploitable this month. Those are being closed off. It's a much better picture than just saying that you're in a horrendous position. Okay, so then we go into the fun area of security operations. So I assume everyone here has a 24/7 cybersecurity operations team doing your security monitoring. They're up all night and all weekend, checking every event. They're all highly skilled. They all know what every single event in there means. Highly doubt it, right? As we all know, a lot of these security operations teams are built with graduates because it's a shit job, right? So going through and churning through all of the events as a graduate when you don't even know what you're talking about yet, right? Even after a couple of years, it's not very much. They get good at what they're doing, but they still don't understand. They haven't been exposed and had the time to actually experience how does the exploit work? How does the backdoor work? How does Kerberos work? How does, all of these different platforms work that you need to be exposed to? So then incident responders. These are an interesting one where they're probably one of the most niche people within our cybersecurity field who actually, to find someone who actually knows what they're doing, right? And I'm not sure I've found one that's completely been able to do everything. Maybe 1 or 2 guys on my team who are pretty good at it. But so as I mentioned, we run a lot of black hat training. So one of the ones I run these days is the automating security with open source. We have a part in there which is automating incident response capabilities. And so across Black Hat Europe, Black Hat Asia, and Black Hat USA, we've got a few hundred students each year or on those. Over a number of years, I did this poll or this survey where I told them all to put their hands up. So put your hand down if you don't, or keep your hand up if you've got an incident response plan. Half of them obviously put their hand down. Put your hand down if you don't know how to actually, or keep your hand up if you know how to actually execute that. Another half of them go down, right? All right, if you suffer a breach on, let's say, one of your Windows machines, do you know every piece of evidence that you need to collect off that machine to do a thorough analysis? Right, you can imagine probably 95% of them put their hands down. You start then asking, what about Mac? Do you know what evidence you need to collect off Mac? Do you know how to actually collect that, right? And then Linux, obviously, how do you do that? And across different variations of Linux, right? So you go through those, and that's just the collection to know what evidence you need to collect. You then collect the evidence, so do you know how to do a memory dump analysis? Do you know how to identify which malicious processes there are? Do you know how to extract the executables out of memory to actually then go and analyze those processes from the memory? Right? Do you actually know how to analyze the executables? Right? Once you've analyzed them, you've got the indicators of compromise. Do you then know what to do with those? Right? How do you then go and integrate those into your organization to stop the threat then spreading? You can imagine going through all of that. I think I got about halfway through for every one of these classes and no one's hand was up. And these are all, students at Black Hat who are supposed to be, quite good cybersecurity people. Not saying they're not, but you get my point. None of them know how to actually investigate or contain a breach. Right, so then you've got security engineers. These are, the guys who are integrating all of your systems, setting up your security architecture, making sure your security operations team, for example, has all of the data that they need to be able to triage events, making sure that those are actually stay active. If anyone's run a SOC, you know how often these integrations go down because a password's expired or someone's changed an API key or they've changed a firewall rule and the thing's dropped off. Clearly speaking from experience. Whether systems are hardened, whether your cloud is hardened across all of your different clouds, right? So when you sort of look at it like that, you actually do need like all of these cybersecurity team members who actually know what they're talking about, not just this general layer of security who manage security, right? And then you've got your whole GRC sort of thing over the top of that, obviously, to then be able to understand what needs doing, not just a tick box. So a technical GRC person who can then go and actually verify that you've got it in place, because I guarantee you, all of your IT people are lying to you, right? When you say, are my systems patched? They say yes. You go and check it and they're not, right? Okay, so I'll just speed it up a bit, but the solution that we've had so far to date is throwing more tech on the fire. Okay, so we've got a problem. We've got these security vendors. They're developing solutions, and we're just throwing more tech on the fire. So you've got this limited security team with limited security skills. Some of these enterprises have minimal teams, and they've got 50 different cybersecurity technologies, right? Which is ridiculous to expect that these guys actually know how to manage this stuff, which is why you end up with 10 to 20% usage of the actual tools that you buy, right? So we spoke about the limited teams and budgets, underutilized investments. I'm ahead of my time. And again, when you start going, all right, yeah, we've got all this great tech, we've implemented it, and we've implemented 10% of it, and it's all great, it's all looking good. Made all those investments, the board's ticking boxes going, oh yeah, we've got endpoint protection, and we've got application whitelisting, and we've got vulnerability scanning and whatnot. What they don't realize is most of it's not being used or it's not effective, okay? So again, we've got more gaps. So then AI comes into the picture, and we've got Satya here saying every software category is going to be fundamentally changed by these two dimensions, right? By AI coming in and just throwing a spanner in the works, and this is for good and bad, right? So obviously attackers get access to this sort of stuff. If you've been to Black Hat or DEF CON, you've seen some of the great presentations around things like exploit development and automated hacking and things like that. But it really is shifting not just the threat landscape we're battling, but then putting that on steroids. Right? So you put that into perspective, and the solution and the approach that we're taking is fundamentally flawed. Right? Like I said, Australia versus the rest of the world, we are going to lose. So the good guys have already lost. Right? So but what if we changed our mindset and we actually looked at the fundamental flaws of the fact that we don't have the people and the skills to actually, run these. We don't have the teams, we don't have the skills to be able to actually solve these problems. So we need to reimagine how we actually approach cybersecurity so that, if you're battling Europe, in a war and you're losing, you don't just keep running at them, right? You need to stop, take a step back and shift your approach, change your strategy, change your whole direction, right? And how are you going to do that? So this paradigm is imagining limitless, right? So limitless cybersecurity teams, limitless cybersecurity capabilities, limitless technologies, limitless scalability to be able to cover your whole environment, and limitless time. So when you start looking at this different paradigm of limitless, right? If you just put everything you're doing out of the way, and you go, all right, actually, let's assume that the impossible is possible, and we can have a limitless team, right? Let's say that we've got a limitless team. They're fully scalable. They are full of rock stars, right? They're working 24/7. They don't get hungry. They don't need to eat. They don't get hungover. So that security ops guy who's hungover the next day misses that critical alert, and then you're in the news with a major security breach. So limitless time is an interesting factor where time becomes irrelevant, right? Which is one of the key things that we're battling so far. So when you have a look at, for those of you who are old enough to, when we were managing data centers with the racks and going and managing cables and the cable ties and all that sort of fun stuff, that all got replaced by virtualizing that physical hardware into the cloud, right? And then suddenly we've got limitless servers, we've got limitless capabilities that can just scale and do everything we wanted, right? So when you start now looking at where we're at with AI and everything, our limit is our people, our physical people. So if we look at virtualizing our people, and this is not to replace our people, this is to augment our teams to get bigger and more scalable. All right, so virtualize our people and their capabilities. The other problem I spoke about was the technology. So the traditional technology approach that we've got, we still need people to be able to run those. So if we then personify the technology and turn them into people, suddenly I'm here talking to you guys. You didn't know what I was going to talk about, but we can interact and you understand me, right? Same sort of thing with our technology. If we change our approach and we look at and we personify the technology and look at it and be able to interact like a human would, like you're a manager talking to your people, then you can actually achieve limitless capabilities. Right, so this is what we've actually done with the Immortal Cyber teams. So we've actually built 6 cybersecurity specialists that we went through before. You can on demand launch AI cybersecurity specialists. So this is actually them in the videos. Right? You can hold down a button and say, a microphone and say, hey, I want you to do a penetration test. They say, no worries. Just give me the scope. You give him the scope. He says, all right, no worries. I'll go and do that for you. I'll let you know when I'm finished. Integrates with, Teams and Google Chat and Slack, however you want to communicate with them. You get a message saying, hey, your penetration test is finished. Here's a report. Let me know if you want me to explain it to you, right? You then say, sure, give me a summary of my penetration test results. He says, all right, well, basically there were X number of hosts, so many vulnerabilities. We broke into 5 systems. We're able to get shell access. You say, oh, okay, great. Create me a dashboard that for this penetration test that has a bar chart of the vulnerabilities and the exploits, and give me a table of all of the findings, right? It goes and generates that for you, right, on the fly based on the query that you've asked it to do. You can then even go down for the techies, go down to the level of, for the exploit that you used against this SMB service on this machine, give me a detailed analysis of what you actually did, right? It'll actually say to you, all right, well, for that system, that was, had eternal blue vulnerability. We use this Metasploit exploit. This was the configuration. We used Shikata Ganai encoder, set up a bind listener on 4444, got a shell on the machine, dumped the hashes and cracked them, right? And you can actually go down to that level of detail. Same sort of thing with cyber threat intelligence monitoring, security operations. So we've got full endpoint agents with all of your antivirus, but also does the Immortals actually then can run incident response on your machines, collect evidence, analyze it, respond to it, give you live sessions. The SOC team actually triage the events, automatically escalate it to the incident responder who goes and investigates it and contains it. Right? There's What else did I mention on there? There was the security engineer, there's the intelligence specialist, there's the GRC specialist. So all of those are available, fully scalable. So limitless capabilities, limitless security teams. You can suddenly go from having this small team of generic cybersecurity people to having an entire team of specialists who you can actually, your team can actually get them to do really advanced things, right? And do it in a scalable way, in a way that you can just naturally talk to them and interface with them. So thank you very much for hanging around. If you have any questions, I'll either be here or they'll kick me out and I'll go outside. We've got a booth. Come and check out the booth. It's a nice flashy one with big screens and lots of music going on, annoying the other vendors. But yeah, thank you very much and enjoy AUSCERT. Thanks, man.